This week, Mr. David Walter, the VP of RSA Archer and RSA Cloud, joins us to discuss how risk is becoming the new focal point for enterprise security programs over even a compliance or security-focused basis. We will discuss why this shift is happening, how regulatory changes are contributing to the shift, and how automated compliance tracking tools are making a difference. Full disclosure, this is a sponsored interview segment. In our second segment today, we'll be joined by Mr. Kevin Haynes, who is the Chief Privacy Officer for the Nemours Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Jacksonville, Florida, that's dedicated to improving the health of children. Kevin will share with us his point of view on risk, security, compliance, and privacy as an actual practitioner and user of RSA tools. We're excited to have both gentlemen with us today as we continue to tear down silos and build bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Today's organizations face an evolving set of security threats and continually changing compliance requirements. As your business grows, privacy concerns only multiply and add to a dynamic set of priorities. Today's organizations need to integrate risk, security, and privacy into a cohesive program. Online Business Systems' team of seasoned security practitioners work closely with you to assess your security posture, policies, procedures, and technologies, providing tailored solutions that are specifically aligned to your business's risk profile and ultimately ensure the protection of your brand. To learn more about Online Business Systems, go to securityweekly.com/online.
And welcome to episode 22 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on Tuesday, March 24th, 2020. I am your working from home host, Mr. Jeff Mann, coming to you from Pasadena, Maryland. Joining me online are my also working from home co-hosts, Scott Lyons, the CEO of Red Lion, Josh Marpet, who's locked and loaded in Wilmington, Delaware, and our own CEO, Mr. Matt Alderman, who's chilling in Colorado.
I am not
Gentlemen,
in Colorado,
welcome.
actually. I'm not in Colorado. Parts unknown.
Okay. Good to know. And plausible deniability. Hey,
Yes.
Before we get started, I do have a couple of quick announcements. You can register for our upcoming webcasts and virtual trainings by visiting securityweekly.com and selecting on the webcast/training dropdown from the top menu bar and clicking registration. Our next webcast, which I believe is March 25th, will be with Gravwell. We're going to cut through the marketing buzzwords and teach you about collecting and analyzing logs in hybrid cloud environments. Also, which is becoming a familiar theme here, want to announce that Cybersecurity Exchange Day, which is to be hosted by Ocean and the Pell Center, which was originally scheduled for Wednesday, March 18th, has, believe it or not, been postponed. The new date is still to be determined, and we will keep you posted as soon as we hear more. All right. Allow me to introduce Mr. David Walter. As I said, he's the VP for both RSA Archer and RSA Cloud. In this role, he leads the development of IRM and cloud strategies for RSA. He joined RSA back in 2010 as part of the Archer acquisition, which is my conclusion based on the evidence that I OSINTed you on, David. And I guess it's working out since you're there 10 years later. David is passionate about enabling companies to manage their business risk, and that's what we want to talk about today. So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be here. And I'm coming live from Lexington, Mass. That's my home. So great to be
Excellent. Great. This working from home thing is really convenient when you do this remote webcasting stuff and podcasting. So, David,
this format. Yeah.
The format works out well.
It does.
Just to get started, if you could just take a moment to sort of introduce yourself and what is your involvement? Maybe expand a little bit on your involvement and role with RSA. What are you passionate about? And before we jump into the heat of things.
Yeah, it's great to be joining you guys today for this discussion. It's one that I have with myself every day. So it's great to have it with other people, and I don't seem as crazy. But I've been at this for a long time now. I've come to this security and compliance world from more of a financial bent, having roles in internal audit and CFO finance type roles. Definitely coming to risk from that perspective. And I came to the Archer product line 15 years ago when I acquired it myself at the Washington Post as I was leading up our Sarbanes-Oxley compliance efforts. I liked it so much that I joined the team shortly thereafter and have been with the product ever since. I've had great opportunities to work in many of the different functional areas within Archer and over the years, including overseas and all that stuff. So today I lead up the product line and have had great time in working with the teams and our customers and really thinking about how risk is transforming in today's digital economy and what kind of challenges pose the industry going forward and how we can do a better job as a vendor in meeting customers' needs. Last year, I also picked up a new role within RSA, is really leading our cloud transformation. So in that role, I think it's kind of interesting because now I'm a little bit of the business side and the consumer side as well of this conversation, as I'm kind of people are looking at me to lead the organization through understanding the risks and security posture that we need to take with how we leverage the cloud more and more for our customers and for our own internal processes. And so it's been fascinating to kind of see that angle as well and being a practitioner again.
Great.
Dave,
hey, I'm sorry, Matt, just to level set, David, probably most people listening have an idea of what Archer is, but in case they don't, could you just briefly describe what Archer is for us?
Absolutely. Happy to do so. So RSA Archer is an integrated risk management platform that has been in the industry in the space of risk and compliance for 20 years now. Amazingly, to say that. We have customers around the world and are very excited and honored to work with many of the top customers and companies in the world in trying to understand their risks across the entire enterprise landscape. So we look at risk management from looking at how people can get better visibility of their risks, gain insight through that visibility, and then ultimately take action on those risks. We like to think of it as our mission in life is to inspire everyone to own risk, no matter where you sit in an organization or what organization size and maturity you are.
Great. Matt, you had a question or a comment?
Well, I worked with David we competed against each other for a number of years, and then we worked together. We're going to say for a number of years. So, okay. I know the space extremely. Yeah, the space extremely well. But David, one, I think from I think it's still this way. I mean, Archer is this broad-based platform that then allows you to add various solutions on top of that platform, integrated together to drive an overall risk management framework. And I assume that's still the case, and you continue to expand that out just from a level setting. But I'm curious on your role at RSA Cloud. Is that because Archer was really the only kind of hosted cloud-based solution that RSA had in the portfolio, so you had the best expertise to take on some of the cloud responsibilities?
Oh, that's a loaded
pretty
question.
Scary.
Come on.
or you were
pretty
out
scary
that
if
day.
I was the one. I was going to say it was pretty scary if I'm the foremost expert in cloud in RSA. Definitely not the case, but actually no. So Secure ID, the RSA Secure ID product and our multi-factor authentication offerings there really led the way with RSA in developing a true SaaS kind of cloud environment. Our fraud and risk intelligence solutions have been on the cloud for a number of years as well. I think what we have done within the RSA Archer space is in really recognizing the shift in industry within risk and compliance to wanting to consume these technologies in a SaaS type of environment and in the cloud is the Archer team took it on themselves to really progress very quickly through the process of going to SaaS as a business model, as well as getting to that DevOps kind of mindset and transformation there. So that happened all last year. We're fully SaaS enabled and capable today. And so kind of with that change and that transformation and how we do things, I kind of was nominated for the one to pick up the rest of the suite or the rest of the RSA products as well, as they're following the same trajectory.
Got it. No, that's great. Yeah.
I should also ask, most people probably know what the cloud is, but could you define it? Just kidding.
Oh, God. We'll make it simple. Someone else's computer. Okay, next.
Yeah. David, we like to start our interviews with our guests with a sort of a broad-based question just to help us level set. There is no right or wrong answer, but I'm curious, given how much you're talking about risk, the question we like to ask is, where do you fall on what we're calling, for lack of a better term, the security versus compliance continuum? That is, how do you see security and compliance playing together, playing against each other, being related, unrelated, and feel free to pepper all of it with risk as you see fit.
Well, I think they're both. It's all about risk, right? At the end of the day, so I think that's the combining factor for both, in my mind. Is compliance is there to try to serve the business and keep the business in business, and security is there to protect the business and to enable them to achieve business objectives. So I think there's a very common mission there for both groups, and I think that the better that they can actually work together, I think each of their missions can be better achieved, frankly. And so I would like to think of myself on the continuum as trying to be right in the middle. Traditionally, I was always coming from a compliance side, and my roles as audit and finance and things like that in the position. And then I kind of started with RSA and working very much with a security company. And so for me, my personal journey was to really learn about security and understand the challenges that security professionals have. And one thing that I clearly noticed was the difficulty that security professionals had in explaining their risk posture and how they wanted to measure risk to the business, and explaining that to management in a cohesive and a productive way. And so kind of my own personal mission for the last number of years is to be able to help compliance or help security risk professionals better have that conversation with their business side, as I have come from that side. So, what language do you use? How do you measure success and outcomes and all that kind of thing is something that I've had a personal passion for.
So which risk frameworks do you recommend?
That's a good question. To me, I don't really care, honestly. I think, I could plug a lot of great frameworks. I think the key is to have one and stick with it and be consistent. I think the key to maturing in your risk journey is to have a sense of where you are, have a clear sense of where you want to go, and then have clear metrics for where you're going on that journey. I think there's a number of frameworks that are really successful, and I think the key to a successful framework is the ability to see a path, and it's about maturity, and it's about taking clear steps along the way, and being very honest and transparent and visible with yourself and with your teams about where you're trying to get to and how you're achieving against that. So like an OKR framework, frankly, to me is almost as important as, a NIST or CSF or something like that.
But I believe, your take on this, David, is that the risk framework, whichever one it is, should really be driving your compliance and your security activities, because you drive it from a risk perspective, not from a security or compliance perspective. Is that kind of right?
Definitely. I mean, I'm coming from a risk perspective, so I think the way that you should think about compliance and security is definitely with a risk lens. I don't think there's a perfect answer for every business. It's not the same. And so that's what I actually like about the change, like the regulatory environment right now, I think in general is going to more of a framework-based approach rather than a prescriptive approach. And I think that's a more sophisticated view, is to enable companies to think about risk and allow them to have a risk posture and a risk attitude towards how they do security and compliance.
So let's get down on the weeds for a second. Let's get down on the weeds for a second. You're talking about the difference between a compliance-based posture and a risk-based posture, which I totally agree with, by the way. Love it. Great point. And, a lot of people that I've talked to and that we've talked to as a show have talked about risk in various ways. We interviewed Ian Amit about the FAIR model. I'm sure you're familiar with them. Mm-hmm. We've talked to, what's his name? Ron
Ross from NIST. Mm-hmm.
About NIST CSF and various things going on there. Thank you. I just had a brain. I apologize. And so we've talked about different models. And I asked you about frameworks. And you said, look, just have one. And I respect that too. That's totally cool. Here in Delaware, where, by the way, our next guest, the Nemours Foundation, they're based out of as well. But I talked about the breach law here in Delaware, and they said, just have a framework, something to hang a hat on. Same ideas you just put out there. But I've got a question for you. What's the cost? And by that, I mean, when you switch from a compliance-based sort of mindset, if you will, to a risk-based framework, what does it cost you in your experience dealing with God knows how many companies in terms of doing that changeover? Is it an effort cost? Is it a time cost, a money cost? What does it take to change over for a company to be able to speak business, to be able to speak risk from just being able to speak checkboxes?
Yeah. I think the biggest cost is cultural cost. I can't tell, I'll be very honest. I'm a software vendor, right? As you guys will label me on, I know, but I have many more conversations with customers about culture transformation than I do about technology, process, and things like that. In order to shift from a compliance-based approach to more of a risk-based approach, you have to have a different mindset coming from the top. One of experimentation, one for risk tolerance as much as risk avoidance. And you have to set parameters for your people to think about risk. And when you think about risk, you're going to have gains and you're going to have losses, right? And you have to know what tolerances we're going to allow people to have within that framework and encourage people to go to the line, right? And test that line, I think. Because there's no way we're going to actually understand where our line is and where our true tolerances are and improve if we don't test that line. So to me, I think, yes, there is process you can put in place to help you. There's great software out there and there's good people that have skill sets in risk management. But ultimately, I think none of that will be successful if you don't have a culture transformation at the same time, which allows people to think differently and rewards that, frankly.
I think a more basic question is, and I don't know if Josh was, if he was leaning one way or the other, but in shifting to a framework approach versus a compliance approach, is the perception or the belief that ultimately it will be cheaper for the organization overall or more expensive overall?
I would think you would hope that it would be more efficient, let's say that, in terms of the cost. I think, I lived in the Sarbanes-Oxley world for a long time, and obviously many of us still do. But I think one of the great outcomes of that, as kind of in relation to what we're talking about here, is the concept of key controls, right? Companies in a compliance type of mindset, they like to acquire controls and tools and technologies and different processes. And we saw an ever increasing amount of controls in organizations because there was no rationalization of that control set. Then when Sarbanes-Oxley came around and you actually had to attest to those controls and management had to say that if they were all working fine, you saw a quick switch to rationalize those controls into the smallest set that was humanly possible to still achieve your goals. And I think that's what a risk-based approach kind of does from a control perspective. It's not about as many controls as you have. That's not the measurement of success. It's actually the measurement of success of the least amount of controls that you need to have to still accomplish your goal. And the goals are different today, right? The goal isn't necessarily just compliance with a law. It's about really, I think, a shift to more of a regular thinking about compliance as a risk, meaning what's the true risk of you not complying with the law? Is it reputational risk? Is it resiliency risk? Is it the right to operate? It's your customer relationships and your ability to serve them in the ways that you've communicated in your legal agreements with them. So compliance, I think overall has shifted quite a bit in the last number of years to think more holistically about compliance with business objectives rather than just compliance with law. And in that sense, it's given us the opportunity to think in a risk way about truly rationalizing the control set and making it much more efficient in terms of how we operate control and compliance.
So I'll share with you. Well, go ahead, Matt. You can.
I was going to ask. Yeah, I mean, that was. I thought you did a great job explaining that, because I think this control rationalization is definitely a benefit to IRM. Where does privacy impact this whole risk discussion? We've seen, obviously, GDPR has been out for a while now. CCPA is coming into the mix. What are you seeing with this new kind of privacy regulation? How does that fit into the overall risk framework?
Yeah, it's good that you brought that up, Matt. I think that, earlier I said it's been nice to see regulators think more from a framework perspective rather than prescriptive about specific control points that you need to accomplish whatever the regulator's goal is. We're not seeing that in privacy, right? GDPR has a number of definitive requirements and the rest of the privacy world. So I think privacy, obviously, from a consumer perspective and a societal perspective, privacy is very key to us and very important. I think we're seeing the regulatory burden from these acts definitely weigh heavily on our customers, and they're very much in reactive mode to build up controls. I just want to comply. I need to comply. I have to be in compliance with these new laws. And so I'm going to build up my control set just to make sure I check these boxes, which personally, I feel that's a little bit of a step back, backwards. I think it will ultimately change, and we'll go back into more of that risk-based approach and framework-based approach and thinking about privacy. But obviously, as a society, I think regulators have noted that consumers are very worried about their privacy. And so they needed to act, and the best way that they know to act is to prescribe certain activities that they want to make sure that their companies have. And so they have gone heavy-handed with that. But I think ultimately that will smooth out, if you will, and change. Now, but that's not to say that the next big issue will come. I think health and safety is obviously one that's on everyone's mind today. And I think coming out of this coronavirus mindset, we're going to have a change there from a regulatory perspective and have new things to worry about. But I think it's a natural evolution in compliance, right? We try to go heavy-handed, and then we go from in very project-based work, and then we try to move it to more of a program and on sustaining kind of mode and rationalize things and only really focus on the things that truly matter to accomplish the goal of that particular regulation. I think it's personally.
I want to push back a little bit and put it in the form of a question. I come from very much a compliance background, PCI in particular. Everybody can drink now. And in my experience, when my customers have tried to get beyond actually following what, for the purpose of our conversation, we'll call the checkbox, not do something that the PCI requirements require them to do. What I tend to see them do as an alternative is nothing. So my question is, how does a focus on a framework in general, or a risk-based framework, how does that get companies to do and maybe I'm making a false assumption here. How does that get them to do something other than nothing, other than strictly what the checkbox said that they should do, presumably without context and sort of a larger vision for how it all fits into a security program? Not too much into one question. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, Jeff. I think I spend a lot of time in our organization. We think about organization's maturity. And I think when it comes to risk and compliance and security, I think there's obviously a wide range of maturity of culture, maturity of process, maturity of people and technology within organizations. And when you think about things like PCI or GDPR that are very prescriptive in nature, I think it's actually great. I'm not saying that's a bad approach. I think it's a great starting point. because it gets people to a common level of capability by being very prescriptive in nature of what we want companies to do within security and privacy. So that level, rises all tides, I would like to think, because it gives people that are not mature and companies that are not mature, it gives them something to shoot for and something very tactical to go achieve. What I was referring to earlier was, well, what's next? What's after that? And how can we make compliance much more efficient and effective once we get to that baseline level? I think we need to take into consideration organizations' own objectives, their own environments, and how they operate with third parties, fourth parties, and the cloud, and all these different natures. Every business is different. And so no one prescriptive law is going to fit everyone's needs. And I think once we get to that base level of compliance that you're referring to, Jeff, is what's the next step beyond that? And how can we help organizations make their programs more effective for their own objectives?
I think the challenge, I think one of the challenges, Jeff, is that if we use PCI as that standard level of baseline, that may be too much for some people. So again, what's that right balance of what is that level set that everybody uses as the foundation? I know you like PCI. I'm just saying for some organizations, that might be a bigger hurdle than for other organizations. So maybe that's not the baseline.
But that's the rub. Hold on, Josh. I'll let you respond in a minute. I just want to say that's the rub, because so many people talk about PCI, and even I think the PCI Council refers to it as sort of the starting point, just the bare bones, the basics. So how do any of us connect the dots between some companies thinking that PCI is oppressive and other companies and organizations thinking PCI is just the bare minimum? Feel free to comment on that, Josh, or just go off on wherever you were going in the first place.
I was going to talk about, I don't have enough alcohol to handle two PCI guys on the show at the same time. It's a problem, man. Come on. I can't drink that fast. I'll be trashed.
Got nothing else to do. We're stuck at home.
Oh, I got work, man. Come on. It's busy. People are working from home, which means their security needs are even greater than before. We've got companies working from home calling, going, hey, how do we handle this work from home and dealing with sensitive information, like PCI information? And the question is they're not used to it. And their disaster recovery plans weren't set up for this. They were not ready for the risks of work from home. So this is pulling this back to the risk management perspective. Is with a compliance-based checkbox perspective, it's not fun. With a risk management perspective, it's scaling of what you've been doing, right? Talk to me, David.
No, Johnny, I completely agree. I mean, this is just, for me, you got to imagine this whole world is fascinating from an educational perspective alone. And there's many elements of this whole environment that we're now in. But what's fascinating to me is that, compliance, if you're only thinking about managing your business through a compliance lens, you will see that you failed, right? You can be in compliance with PCI and GDPR and everything else, and you're still not ready for the world that we are now, as of today, living in and affecting your business. And so I think you need to think in a different way. And I think I think what's fascinating to me is every human on the planet are now risk managers. Everyone is making daily calculations about how they want to interact with the world and thinking risk. And so personally, I'm already having conversations with my peers about, okay, God willing, we come out of this obviously very hopefully soon and everyone's safe. How does the world change from a risk management perspective now that everyone is a little bit more mature, if you will, in thinking about risk and having conversations about risk? How can we leverage that to enable a broader sense of risk management in the workplace for organizations and really leveling up, frankly, the conversations that we'd like to have customers engaged in, frankly, at their business level about thinking about business resiliency and compliance and remote workforces and all that. All of that's in there. It just hasn't been really there, talked about for some companies because it wasn't a compliance checklist, if you will.
And it wasn't a risk that anybody saw as a concern necessarily. Back to your point earlier, does this create cultural change going forward to think about scenarios like this and the risk implications of having a remote workforce when they never thought about it before? Maybe that's what we learn out of this situation.
Yep.
This you got to think something's going to change, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, Well, I was going to say I don't think there's a risk framework in the land that anticipated what we're experiencing right now and what we're probably going to experience for the foreseeable future in the next couple weeks or months. But we've got compliance people talking to a vendor. What I'm really looking forward to is our second segment where we're going to bring somebody on that actually has to live this and breathe it. And it doesn't matter what the assessor, auditor, or vendor says. So let's pause for a minute, come back with the second segment and talk to an actual practitioner.